Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm talking about the Dogfight Double gift set from Airfix featuring the Douglas A-4B Skyhawk and the Mikoyan Gorievich MiG-17F Fresco in 1/72nd scale. I'll be having a quick look at the history of both aircraft, first the A4 and then the MiG-17. Then I'll take a look at what you get in the box. After that I'll show you how I made both kits. Again, first the A4, then the MiG-17. Let's kick off then and look at the history of these two iconic aircraft, starting with the Douglas A4. The A4 Skyhawk is a small, lightweight attack fighter developed by the Douglas Aircraft Company. It came from a requirement from the US Navy for a jet-powered replacement for the aging but excellent A1 Skyraider attack aircraft. Designer Ed Heinemann created a lightweight design that was so small it didn't need folding wings to be operated from US aircraft carriers. The first prototypes flew in June 1954 and deliveries to the US Navy and US Marine Corps started in 1956. The Skyhawk saw extensive service in the Vietnam War, used from the very start of the air war in 1964 through to 1972. A total of 362 Skyhawks were lost to all causes during the conflict. Other nations have famously used the A4 in combat. Israeli Air Force Skyhawks were used during the War of Attrition and the Yom Kippur War, while Argentina used Skyhawks operated by their Navy and Air Force during the Falklands War. Skyhawks were also sold to the Royal Australian Navy, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, to Brazil, Kuwait, Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore. The small size, superb agility and low-speed handling made the A4 a perfect aircraft for the world-famous Blue Angels display team, but also as a surrogate for Warsaw Pact aircraft such as the MiG-17. The A4 was used in various training establishments for dissimilar air combat, notably at the US Navy's Top Gun School. Some 2,960 Skyhawks were produced, with the last aircraft leaving the factory in 1979. The MiG-17 was a high subsonic fighter designed at the Mikoyan and Gorievich Bureau in the Soviet Union. It was created using lessons from the similar but smaller MiG-15 jet that was flown notably in the Korean War. The MiG-17 was initially fitted with the same Klimov VK1 engine, an enlarged copy of the Rolls-Royce Nene. The prototype flew on 14th of February 1950. Early testing revealed some critical issues, including tail flutter that caused a crash, killing legendary test pilot Ivan Ivachenko. After modifications were made, the MiG-17 entered production in September 1951 and serviced the following year. Given the NATO reporting name Fresco, the MiG-17 was a remarkable day fighter designed to counter the early US strategic bombers such as the B-50 Superfortress and the B-36 Peacemaker. The MiG-17F variant, with an afterburner fitted to the engine, flew in 1953, giving an improved rate of climb and better high-altitude manoeuvrability. Its armament of a 37mm cannon and two 23mm cannons was powerful at medium to short range, and its gun sight, matched with a small target-ranging radar, proved effective in the Vietnam War, with 28 confirmed kills, including those against more modern aircraft such as the F-4 Phantom. MiG-17s were built under license by WSK Mielec in Poland as the Lim-5 and Lim-6, and in China as the Shenyang J5. More than 10,500 MiG-17s in all its derivatives were produced, with thousands sold to air forces around the world. The only current operator is thought to be North Korea. Many aircraft are preserved in museums around the world, and a handful are still airworthy. This double kit gets you a token worth 2 flying hours. Now, as a member of the Airfix Club, you can collect these towards a free kit in the future, or you can choose to donate them to Models for Heroes. A link to this excellent charity is in the information box below. Let's get on and see what we get in the box. The box opens at one end and I can slide the tray out. There are a couple of plastic bags of parts. This one contains the A4 Skyhawk, while this other one is for the MiG-17F. There is a stand if you're going to display them together, but I'm doing them separately, so I won't need this. Then we have the instructions. This booklet covers both aircraft, one after the other. Next is a decal sheet. This contains markings for both aircraft, of course. If you buy them separately, the markings will be different. At the top we have the A4B of VA93, the blue blazers, on USS Bennington, and not VA15, as it says up in the top left there. That was the aircraft used in the 2019 standalone box. At the bottom are the markings for the MiG-17 from the 921st Air Regiment of the Vietnamese People's Air Force. There are plenty of stencils, but the instructions do say that many of these would have been painted over or forgotten during maintenance during the war, so it really is still up to you how many you use. Anyway, the decals are very smart, lovely bright printing, very clean, and on the US aircraft at least not too many stencils. Finally, there's a bag of paints, paintbrushes and glue, as Dogfight Doubles are classed as gift sets. I have yet to find out what the yellow paint is for. The parts for the A4 come on 3 sprues of grey plastic and 1 small sprue for the transparencies. These seem reasonably well moulded, but some of them are a bit fragile, as we'll see later. The parts for the MiG-17 are contained in these 3 large sprues of grey plastic, plus 1 of transparent plastic for the canopy and some lights. The parts seem well moulded and crisp with very little flash. But for now, let's get on and start building our Skyhawk. Now most of the parts, like this cockpit floor, I cut away from the sprue with side cutters. Then I sand down any excess pieces with my homemade sanding sticks. Smaller pieces, such as this half of the ejection seat, are cut away using a craft knife. Now here you can see this excess moulding that needs to be cut away from this pretty inconvenient location. That done, I can join the 2 halves of the ejection seat together. Next I'm painting the seats, and as you can see, this olive green really hasn't done too well sitting for some time on a shelf. It's probably not beyond rescue with a few drops of water and a good old stir, but maybe I'll use my own. I have also pre-painted the instrument panel in black, and now I can apply the decal to it. As usual, I'm using tweezers to hold the backing paper and a brush to encourage the decal into place. I'm going to do the same for the side panels of the cockpit, which have their own decals. Then back to the ejection seat, and I've painted the cushions olive green and added seat belts in linen and a few dabs of silver. Now I just need to finesse them into place together. Next I'll add the rear cockpit bulkhead to the cockpit floor, and when that's secure I can slip the seat in. Now this is quite a squeeze, so do be careful. After that I can add the control column, which I've pre-painted. Then the instrument panel can go across the front of the cockpit section, and I'll leave all that to dry. On then to the air intake for the engine. Now this is painted white on the inside with the engine fan in gunmetal. Then I'm adding this inlet centre body, also painted in white. Another thing to do here is to make the engine exhaust pipe, which goes together like so. And on each side of the fuselage there is the air inlet. The cockpit section can now be put into one half of the fuselage, followed by that inlet body and the exhaust pipe. I'm going to add lead shot as nose weights. The instruction leaflet says 5 grams. Finally, I'm ready to put the fuselage halves together. When these are secure, I'm going to add a few more lead shot to the nose area, The white PVA glue I used will still be wet, and the nose didn't hold quite 5 grams originally. Just a couple more will do the trick. On then to the wings. First I have to drill holes for the stores pylons. These are 1mm holes on the centre line and 0.8mm holes on each wing. Now if you're going to use a display stand, you'll also need to drill 2mm wide holes for that as well. Once the holes are drilled, I can fit the upper surfaces of the wings to the lower half. I'll let them set up with some clamps. And when the wings are dry, they can go onto the fuselage. You slip the front end of the assembly in first and then push the rear of it into place, and it is a pretty good fit. While I'm waiting for the wings to dry, I'll start work on the canopy. Now I've masked the canopy off with tape and then added a bottom coat of black. Then they can go into place with some white PVA and they can dry. The last bit for now on the fuselage are these cannon ports in the wing roots. When they're on, the fuselage is ready for priming and paint. Again, whilst one thing finishes, other things are being built, such as the fuel tanks for the wings, and I'm also painting the wheels for the undercarriage. When the main paint has dried and it's had its first satin varnish, I'm going to start adding the decals. Now these decals are very big for this tiny aircraft. This side decal has to fit over the refueling pipe, so it needs some decal fix or microset to make sure it sticks into the contours. All these big decals can be fiddly, so do take your time in applying them. This stripe on the side is a real problem if you don't get it just about right first time, as it is difficult to handle. This decal on the tail can be an issue as well, as it is a bit fragile and can break easily. On the instructions you can see how two of the decals, the ship and squadron markings and the word Navy, sit over the break in the air brakes. If you're going to do the air brakes open, you'll have to do a little bit of cutting. The trickiest one is this, the one with the ship and squadron, as the brake is along the bottom of the text. Just use a very sharp craft knife and a steel ruler to keep your fingers safe. Then you can apply the text to the air brakes whilst they're still on the sprue. The cut off text needs to be lined up with the top. The cut down word Navy is a bit easier to do. You can then fix the remaining parts of the decals to the fuselage side. Another bit of a pain is this decal for the inside of the air intake, because it is too big. It goes inside the inlet, but it kind of curls over at the top and bottom. I'll go over the excess in white a bit later on. My next job is fitting the slats on the leading edge of the wings. The inside was often painted red, which contrasts really nicely with the grey and white of the wings. The slat supports are built into the wings, so they're very easy to set. Now if you want the slats retracted, say in mid-flight, cut off the supports and glue the slat directly to the wing. I've painted the fuel tanks now, so I can add the pylons. I find it easier to do it this way round, rather than fit the pylon to the wing and then sit the fuel tank in place. Onwards, and we move on to the undercarriage, unless of course you're using a display stand and showing it in flight, in which case just attach the closed doors. Now if you are using the undercarriage, these main legs are quite chunky and they sit very firmly in these holes in the wings, like this. Now the actuators, I've found that they snapped at the slightest attempt to remove them from the sprue. I think they're moulded too close for such very fine pieces. I tried both side cutters and I tried a knife, but they still broke. However, there is a workaround. The upper half of the strut fits well into a slot in the wing, and it sort of sits at the correct angle. Now the lower half sits into a hole on the side of the main leg. This means you can align the lower half with the upper half pretty easily, and just add a tiny dab of glue to secure them. The nose leg goes in very straightforward, and this has a small bracing strut that gets attached to the side. The wheels go onto the main legs very easily. There are these alignment holes as well as the main axle hole. Next I'll fit the gear doors. The one at the front sits on the port side, with a smaller door sitting on the rear of the leg. For the main gear, the forward door sits to the outside of the wheel well, and behind that is a door covering the retracted leg. Next are the stores, so I've opted for a centerline 1000 bomb painted in olive green and with a yellow nose ring. Then the large fuel tanks can go on, one under each wing. Then the air brakes that we put the decals on earlier on. First the brake is mounted at the front, and then we put the actuator ram in behind to hold it open. With all of that set up, I can add the tailplanes or horizontal stabilisers. Now I've already painted them off whilst they're on the sprue, so there's nothing to do but slot them in place. Then I can fit the gun barrels for the cannon into the wing root, and I can attach the long refuelling probe to the starboard side of the aircraft, and with that the kit is complete. As usual, I've given the parts a quick wash, and when they're dry, sprayed them with a bit of primer. Then I can start painting the inside of the cockpit. The ejection seat comes in two pieces, a base and the back, which I've pre-painted, but I'll add the paint for the straps later on. The instrument panel is painted black as usual, and I'll apply decals here and inside the cockpit at this point. With the decals dry, I fit the cockpit floor to the bottom and the instrument panel to the top of one half of the cockpit tub. Then I can fit the other half. With that set, I'll add the control column, followed by the ejection seats, now with painted straps. Now to weight the nose. Now Airfix say to add 20 grams to the front of the cockpit tub. A quick calculation shows that the hole there is about 3/4 of a cc. This much liquid mercury weighs less than 10 grams. I'll mark Airfix with an F for basic science. What I'll do is fill the hole as much as I can with lead shot and white PVA glue, and I'll try a few other things. While I'm mulling that one over, I'll build the engine exhaust, then add an engine exhaust ring at the back. I've marked the fuselage with the rough wheel location and where the cockpit tub fits in. The tub slots into place very simply. Then I can add the engine exhaust section to the rear of the fuselage. If you're going to use the display arm, which on reflection is the simplest option, then you have to open up these two holes on either side of the fuselage. There's also this two-part window that fits into the bottom. Now I'm going to add some more shot to this part of the fuselage, but the slot for the wing will let them fall out before the glue dries. So I'm going to fit the wing now, but just trim down this little edge of the tab so it doesn't get in the way of the ballast. If you are going to do the kit wheels up, you need to cut off this telltale rod from the top of each wing. Also cut off the small tab in the undercarriage bay. I do need to drill some 0.9mm holes in the lower wings for the fuel tank pylons. There are 4 holes in each wing. Again, if you're doing wheels up, there is a blanking door that fits in here. There is also a hole for a landing light to fit in, and as with most lights, I'll paint the back of this silver. Then each wing is put together from its two halves and set aside with clamps to dry up. When the wings are dry, I can slot them into the fuselage halves, and then when they're set, I can fill the space I marked out before with more shot and glue. We'll need quite a lot more because we're now closer to the pivot point over the wheels. This is frankly a lot of lead. But with those dry, I can finally put the two halves of the fuselage together and leave them to set. When that's done, I can add the cannon pack to the underside of the nose, then add the nose inlet ring. I'll fiddle around with the alignment and then keep it all in place with tape. Next I'm going to add the gun sight transparency to the cockpit, then I'll start painting the cockpit frame. First I'll use black acrylic, that way any overspill I can just scratch away with a sharp cocktail stick or toothpick. When the gun sight is secure, I'll paint the body of that black as well. At the tail end I can fit the two rudder pieces in place. Then there are these small fillets at the back of the air brake housing if you're having the air brakes open. If not, there are closed ones to put in place. After which I'll add the tail planes. Now note they have different peg spacings, so only go in one way round. Back to the nose, and I can add the 37mm gun barrel first, followed by the two 23mm barrels. Then the windshield and canopy go in place with a bit of white PVA glue. When that has dried, I'll brush paint the whole kit with Vallejo aluminium and then airbrush in some olive green patches. Now once all the paint has dried, I can start on the decals. As usual, I use tweezers to hold the backing paper and a paintbrush to persuade the decals into place. I must say that I love the way the red and yellow stand out against the metal and olive colours. Under the wings now, and I'm fitting the pylon and forward brace for the fuel tanks. With those setting up, I'll start on the wheels. First of all, the main leg sits on the gear door and then the wheels sit on the axle. When they're ready, the inner gear door goes in against the fuselage, then this small outer door goes at the far end of the wheel well. Then the main leg is attached against the outer edge of the wheel well, and finally a bracing strut is added. By contrast, the nose wheel goes in quite simply, and the nose gear doors fit nicely on either side. The fuel tanks can now be added. They sit very securely on the pylon and brace. The open air brakes fit into the sides and are held open with a small ram. Then a radio mask goes on the side of the fuselage and pitot probes on the ends of the wings. And that is your MiG complete. Well, that's that. This is a nice pairing of planes from an interesting era, quite well presented and quite well modelled. The A4 I think is the lesser of the two models. The decals are tricky to match to the layout given and can be difficult to place. Some parts of the undercarriage are really tricky to remove in one piece from the sprue. That said, it does go together quite well and it's straightforward enough to build. The MiG-17 is a better kit, a nicer model to make all round. There is the issue of weights if you're showing it on its wheels, but there are workarounds. Check out the comments on the MiG-17 standalone video I've done, for example. I like this kit a lot. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and maybe found it useful, please do remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, where you'll find plenty of other builds and a range of new projects as they're completed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.